Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming today. My name's Mark Goff. I'm the Chief Executive at the Capitals Coalition. We're now on the home stretch, as you all know, and we've only got a few more days left to reach this transformative agreement and halt and reverse nature loss by 2030 for a nature-positive world. With so little time left for the global biodiversity framework to be agreed, today we're going to hear a clear message. Ambition must be higher, resources must flow faster, and a rights-based approach must sit at the heart of the global biodiversity framework. In the next few days, ministers and negotiators must commit to finding common ground. If they do not, the consequences will be devastating for nature, but also for all of us who depend upon nature. Today, I'm joined by three leaders: Marco Lambertini, the Director General of the WWF International, Jennifer Morris, the CEO at the Nature Conservancy, and Patricia Zurita from BirdLife International. We'll hear from each of them, and then we'll open the floor to questions from journalists. First, over to you, Marco.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, everybody, for joining us here and online. Let me elaborate a little bit on the points raised by Mark already in his introduction. First of all, we all realize we are at a very critical moment. On one hand, and two things needs to happen. Two things. On one hand, countries must step up and find convergence and solutions on the needed finance to conserve biodiversity globally. In essence, we need to have more money. We need to have more money to go to the south, and we have to be more money coming from multiple sources and through an instrument that delivers those resources quickly with higher accessibility than today, where it matters. We welcome constructive proposals from parties in this direction, and we're beginning to hear some of them being proposed. But this is one dimension. Resources, super important. But there is another dimension as well. And it is about negotiators need to bring back the ambition on conservation, on sustainable use and footprint, on implementation that has been diluted, I'm afraid, from the beginning of the negotiations. We've been seeing systematically some countries weakening the ambition. The ambition needs to come back. For example, we need to ensure that the mission is a mission that sets the world on a clear trajectory towards delivering a nature-positive future by halting and reversing nature loss by 2030. This could be the below 2 degrees equivalent for nature, a global measurable direction codified by the mission. We need a clear conservation target. It's very disturbing that what science is asking us to do, at least protect 30% by 2030 of the existing nature, particularly intact nature on the planet, is still in brackets. And we need to also have a clear reference to ecological footprint, again, in brackets today. Nature-based solutions are in brackets, and that's the link to the climate agenda. And key elements of the implementing mechanism are in brackets again, including ratcheting, and that will represent the opportunity to strengthen the ambition at the country level over time. So both ambitions and commensurate mobilization resources are essential if the world is to secure a new deal for nature that delivers a nature-positive future and addresses the biodiversity crisis. I said ambition is being diluted, and we are seeing ambition being diluted as we speak, and that has to stop. And I think this is the time for governments to really come together, stick together, use nature as a way to be united in one direction. If we don't do that, if we deliver a weak global biodiversity framework, we will continue to lose nature, we will continue to jeopardize our food security, water security, health, well-being, and our climate agenda. A weak global biodiversity framework is not acceptable. This conference of the parties cannot deliver a weak global biodiversity framework. Countries need to choose the right side of history, and we are here to make, not to break. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. A weak global biodiversity framework is not acceptable. Jennifer, you're going to now tell us a bit more about the critical need for mobilizing finance, please.
Thank you, Mark. So without finance, none of this can happen. And I think if, to Marco's points, if the world was really serious about the need for financing, a lot more people would be watching what's happening here in Montreal just as much as they're watching what's happening in Qatar. It's critical that we get money on the table to fund a successful global biodiversity framework. But the good news is we've had some substantial pledges in the last 18 months, and those total up to, over the last 18 months, $6 billion in new funding for biodiversity. This is critical. This is for public financing. This is critical fast start funding that we must have to fund our ambitious objectives under the Global Biodiversity Framework. In the last 48 hours alone, we've had new financing from Canada. Actually, this was last week. The Prime Minister announced $350 million in Canadian dollar support outside of Canada to developing countries to finance the global biodiversity agenda in those countries. And here in Canada, 800 million Canadian dollars of funding for Indigenous-led conservation. This is the largest investment made in Indigenous-led conservation on the planet. And I think Canada needs to be saluted for this incredible investment in Indigenous conservation in the country of Canada. In addition, from the Netherlands, we had an announcement of a 50% increase, resulting in a target of $150 million in new financing. From Spain, $550 million, US dollars of its official development aid for biodiversity from 2021 to 2025. Again, this is fast start finance. And significant investments by Japan, the US, and Norway made all significant commitments. So this is a step in the right direction, and we need to make sure that this down payment for the future of our planet is realized and gets to the ground, to the people who need it the most. We urgently need a transformative global biodiversity framework with these ambitious goals and targets, and the funding is critical, as I mentioned, to deliver on the implementation. So it's critical to not only have public funding, but also to have private finance. And a new 10-point plan, which is this approach of an integrated investment plan that looks at subsidies, that looks at public and private money, is being adopted now by over 40 signatories just in the last 3 months, and is being led by the governments of Ecuador, Gabon, the Maldives, and the United Kingdom. So this is creating momentum for a comprehensive biodiversity investment framework that we have never had before. It gives me, in fact, and I think all of us on the stage, incredible hope that we're moving towards the money that we need to see at least a doubling of overseas direct assistance by 2025 in this fast start period. So one of the other efforts I just want to highlight is coming from Barbados and Mia Motley. This was mentioned in Sharm. She announced the Bridgetown Initiative. And just to say that we very much support the Bridgetown Initiative, which again will look at a transformation of overseas development assistance to developing countries, looking at things such as debt conversions, which is getting a lot of, I think, emphasis as we look at the triple crises of biodiversity, climate, and debt in developing countries. And so just want to say officially that we are very much supportive of Prime Minister Motley and the efforts to encourage a transition in multilateral development banks to ensure the just transition and recognize the increased debt burdens that these countries are facing in the midst of climate change and biodiversity disasters. There's also been a lot of talk about a new biodiversity fund, and I just want to say officially that we, as a collaboration of NGOs, we want to ensure that money comes to the ground as quickly as possible and that we minimize transaction costs. So we need to make sure that we work within existing institutional frameworks while ensuring that Indigenous peoples and local community get access to money as quickly as possible. So these are down payments. And we know that we have to not only get an agreed upon global biodiversity framework, but continue to scale the both public and private ambition of all countries around the world to ensure that we're left with a nature positive world for ourselves and for future generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. So there is momentum to support the global biodiversity framework. Patricia, we're going to now hear about human rights and the essential role that's going to play, please.
Thank you, Mark. So we heard ambition. We need very clear targets. We want a global biodiversity framework that is truly getting us to bend the curve and the trend of nature loss into recovery. We've heard about money. We've heard about initial very positive results in terms of the conversations and the pledges. We want to make sure that we put this in a triangle of ambition, finance, but also right-based approach. We cannot do this the same way that we have been doing it. We have to change, we have to transform, we have to heal our relationship with the planet. And the best way to do that is ensure that we are empowering local communities, indigenous peoples, and that right-based approach for the implementation really happens from day one. We've been hearing a lot from the indigenous peoples and local communities and the biodiversity stewards that this cannot be the just politically correct language. We want to see this in true effective implementation from day one. We need them. They need us, and the planet needs us all together. We need to make sure that we put nature at the heart of everything that we're doing, and that, yes, we go for the best agreement possible with the best financing possible, but also ensuring that it is based on the rights of people. Ministers must agree on a timeline which tracks our collective progress over the decade to 2030. And we need to make sure that this combination of implementation with right ambition, that we are paying for it and that we're doing it on a right-based approach is implemented. Critical to this is an ongoing real-time process where we look at our progress and we make sure that we are very critical so we don't fall in the same trap that we had with the Aichi targets. We need to make sure that we're monitoring our progress. The three of us and all of the conservation community is truly looking at the results of this convention to make sure that we end up with a global biodiversity framework that changes the trend. We need to bend the curve. We need to end up with a nature positive future for us and for our children. And the only way that we're going to do that is with strong ambition, strong finance, and a right-based approach.
Thank you. So the message is really clear. Ambition has got to be high, resources must flow faster, and we need a right-based approach to this. The foundational interplay between nature and people must be taken into account at the forefront of this. Also, this is the last opportunity we're going to have, and we've heard this many times before, but we have to secure a just and fair and necessary transition here to a nature-positive economy. We'll now turn to questions from the floor. I'll take a couple at a time from journalists, please. Yes, over here first.
Hello. Okay. Hi. Thank you. This is Fermin Gu from China Dialogue. One question for Jennifer. If you could elaborate a little bit further on the how much have you seen on debt for nature swaps here at the summit? I know you've been engaged quite a lot with that, and it's been a growing demand by global South countries. And I saw you making highlighting a few figures on that on an event a few days ago. How much are you seeing that scaling up over the next few years? Thank you.
Excellent. We'll take a couple of questions, Jennifer, and then come back to you.
Thank you. Tetsuji from Kyodo News. My question forwarded to Marco. I know that many people, more than 120, 110 countries supporting 30 by 30 target. That's what I understand. I'm just wondering why still that was in the bracket. And the second question, can you someone talk about the mandatory issue of TNFD report disclosure? I think the text is getting weak and weakened.
Is there a third question?
Hi, Alex Siriapel with Le Devoir. A question for Ms. Morris. If there's no global biodiversity fund created, what are the main existing instruments that could be used? Can you name a few? Thank you.
Thank you. Jen, would you like to pick up on the debt for nature and the existing things?
Absolutely. Thank you. So we're seeing tremendous opportunities with the debt conversion strategy, debt for nature swaps, this is often called. And the reason is what I said, there's increasing indebtedness throughout the global south. We're seeing, in fact, a doubling of nations that have currently over 60% of their GDP is often through just debt service, and that is unsustainable, especially in light of climate change and the need to invest in a post-COVID economy. So we are, of the transactions that we have done as Nature Conservancy through our local partnerships, we've converted over $530 million in sovereign debt through our deals in the Seychelles, in Belize, and most recently we announced in Sharm el-Sheikh in Barbados. That has yielded over $300 million in new funding for conservation to finance the 30 by 30 goals that the countries themselves have set, but have been unable to achieve, in part because of their debt service requirements. We see a huge opportunity in increasing this. We're having countries that are quite interested in pursuing this approach. We have a pipeline now of over $10 billion in debt conversions that will yield $2 billion plus in, again, new money for conservation, which will yield tremendous results and impacts on marine and terrestrial conservation to help those countries achieve their 30 by 30 targets.
Thank you, Jennifer. Marco, did you want to answer the 30 by 30?
Yeah, so I'm afraid this is one of the main reasons for the frustration in this process, because the process we're in allows for a minority of country to hold ambition hostage. And that's a significant source of frustration for the countries which are more ambitious, are progressive, want to see more action, clearer targets, measurable, and more resources to match the ambition. So I'm afraid that's the process we're in. And that doesn't mean that countries that are more ambitious will stop delivering that ambition. But as part of the agreement on GBF, the rules are around consensus, and so that allows lower ambition sometimes to hold higher ambition hostage.
And I'll just respond on the mandatory requirements, which is in Target 15 for business. Within that, businesses have been here, as you know, calling for mandatory assessment and disclosure of impacts and dependencies. The negotiations were getting very close, but mandatory is still in brackets at the moment. But actually, the call from business to actually want to do something about this has been very, very clear at this COP. So we'll see what happens in the next couple of days. Did you want to respond?
I just wanted to add a very quick thing about the mandatory. This boils down to accountability. One of the biggest problems with the implementation of the Aichi targets was that there was no true accountability. So eliminating or putting in brackets mandatory in Target 15 goes into that same line of lack of accountability. We want accountability. We want transparency. We want clear targets so we can hold ourselves accountable to the progress of the GBF. If we take it mandatory, if we take the targets out, then there's no accountability, and this will continue to be a very fuzzy, soft, non-accountable, non-ambitious agreement.
So we need the targets. More questions? Oh, sorry. Jennifer, you want to answer the other one?
I think we can all answer this one. So the existing mechanisms, the question was around if we don't have a new fund, what other mechanisms do we have? We, of course, have the Global Environment Facility, which all the organizations up here are working very closely with. The Global Environment Facility has been criticized, I think, unjustly, quite frankly. These institutions need to evolve. The Global Environment Facility provides excellent opportunities for access. However, the processes are complicated, especially for communities and indigenous communities. It needs to evolve, and I would encourage the trustees of the Global Environment Facility to look at ways that some modalities can be changed to make sure that Indigenous people, local communities that often find it very difficult to access these large institutions can have an easier way to do that. I don't know if others want to comment on that as well.
Yeah, I think the other element that we want to make sure that we see is that this new mechanism within the existing mechanisms is actually accepting funding from multiple and diverse sources. One of the biggest problems that we have right now with implementation is that it is incredibly constrained, and that has to do with the governance. So what we want is not spend 5 years designing a new mechanism, use the current mechanisms, bring in more and more diverse money, and make sure that it is accessible in a right-based approach to local communities, Indigenous people, multiple conservation and civil society organizations in the South.
I absolutely agree with all that just you two said. And I would add indigenous communities, but also least developed countries, because there is also lack of capacity in many countries to actually access access funds from complicated mechanisms. So just to sum up, I would say this is a major opportunity to reform an already effective mechanism, but to make it even more effective, more accessible, with more resources. So we just think this is the way to deliver the resource mobilization plan for an ambitious GBF. But the ambition in GBF needs to come up again because there is no mechanism for funding a low ambitious agreement.
More questions?
Gerd Braun, a correspondent for newspapers in Germany. You talk in your invitation about your concern about a possible breakdown of the talks. So how big is your concern, and would this then mean a breakdown, a failure of the whole conference? What is your perspective? How big is your hope still?
Oh, thank you. At the front here.
Yeah, I've just got one question online from Michael Casey at Associated Press. He asks, can you talk where negotiations stand in terms of finance and whether there are competing proposals on how much should be committed?
And do we have a third?
Natasha Gilbert from Nature News. I was just wondering if you could say a little bit more about the timeline. You said ministers need to agree a timeline. What stage is that at?
Great. So conversations around where the breakdowns might be or the negotiations stand in the timeline. Do you want to go first, Jennifer?
Sure. Failure is not an option. We are optimistic this will happen, and we're going to pursue success. We still have many days. You would think that today would be the last day, but we will still have many days left in the negotiations. Hopefully we'll round up early next week. But quite frankly, we have to get a global biodiversity framework that we can all be proud of and move forward.
Marco?
Yeah, nothing to add. I think we can't afford a failure here in Copenhagen. We're already late, and nature loss continues unabated. So countries really need to step up to their responsibility and deliver what has to be delivered. We're pushing very hard for a successful outcome. Tomorrow we'll have a better sense what that means in terms of acceptability of the level of ambition in the draft GBF. But yeah, like Jennifer, our aim is to deliver a ambitious GBF, sufficiently ambitious to get us on a path to halt and reverse biodiversity loss by 2030.
Patricia?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think what we want is an ambitious agreement, right? And failure, as Jennifer said, is not an option. But at the same time, if we end up compromising the targets, if we end up compromising the timeline, if we end up compromising the commitment, then we need to really question whether we are going to back up a very weak GBF. We are all fighting, and we are very optimistic that we will get a strong, ambitious global biodiversity framework with clear targets, with clear timelines, and with clear financing. But we want to make sure that if we end up with something that is really, really watered down, we'll question it.
Just to build on that, as I said in my opening statement, a weak GBF is unacceptable because we can't have a weak GBF means license to lose more nature, to lose more services to humanity from nature, and to really miss the opportunity to reverse it and build a nature positive future. So no weak GBF can be accepted.
Thank you. I think we're just coming up to time now. If there are any more questions or you do want to talk to us, we'll be at the back out here if you've got a few more questions.
We may take a few more.
We can take a few more.
Well, there's
Okay.
no press conference at 11:30, so I'm giving you an extra 1 or 2 minutes
Thank
for
you
you
very
and
much.
the press. So,
Thank you.
hey, we're close to Christmas, huh?
It's a great Christmas present. Thank you.
Mark, there was a question from online that I didn't answer on competing proposals.
Oh, competing, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, they've also replied just to say that they're actually talking about the finance in the framework, and what proposals are on the table in terms of the finance of the framework.
Right. So the announcements that I mentioned and that $6 billion of new public money negotiated over the last 18 months is to finance the biodiversity goals that will come out of the framework. Now, if we don't get a framework, which we will get a framework, that money will still flow. And your question, the question online specifically around competing proposals, these are complementary proposals to each other. These are funding announcements by members of the EU and Japan and other countries that are not competing. They're working together with the leads in each of the countries to invest that money in the biodiversity goals that country sets.
Just to build on that and maybe to complete the answer, we heard about 2 proposals coming from developing countries, or rather than proposals, 2 requests. One is to have a brand new fund dedicated to biodiversity, and one is to have, as we described earlier, a fund which is a new instrument, but part of an existing mechanism that in this case will have to be the GF, because it's the most ready available one, with all the elements that Jennifer mentioned, easier accessibility, multiple sources. So these are the 2 ideas, proposals that we heard about, to answer your question. But as you heard before, the GF option is the one that would deliver faster resources and from a multiple source of funders through a reform of the instrument itself.
And this goes back to the point of the importance of implementing from day one. We don't want to spend a lot of time designing a new financial mechanism for implementing the global biodiversity framework. We want to use the existing structures, acknowledging that right now we have limitations and there is openness from the GEF to enable a more diverse, more flexible, more accessible, faster way of transferring funding to implement the global biodiversity framework. And so we can implement from day one and don't spend years trying to get the perfect fund in place.
So we have got time for one more. Is there one more question in the middle over there? Okay. We'll take both of them if you can keep it quick.
Okay, yeah, my question is for Jennifer. I'm a reporter with the Canadian Press. It's just this $700 billion number that we're talking about annually to save biodiversity, it's just a very daunting number. And I guess I would ask, and I think a lot of just people who don't know that much about it are asking, why does it cost so much to protect nature? What will this money be used for concretely? Why does it cost so much to leave nature alone or to not destroy something?
Excellent.
Right.
Let's just take the other one. There's one quickly next to it as well, and then.
Thank you. Thais Gadarara from Canal de la Ciudad. Going in deep about the GEF, yesterday at the EU press conference, they mentioned that the GEF presents some possible options of change. Do you know anything about this and which will be that options of change? Thank you.
Jennifer?
Sure. So the $700 billion number includes, about half of that number includes eliminating, ideally, or at least reducing substantially subsidies which destroy nature. So it's not all new public money or private money. It's really, we have to tackle the subsidy problem. If we can redirect agriculture into a way that sustains rather than destroys nature will actually achieve a lot of the problem, since most of the biodiversity loss we're seeing on this planet is coming as a direct result of unsustainable agriculture. So that's why that number is so large. So it's embedded with changes in policy, which add up to that $700 billion number.
GF? Okay.
Yeah,
Go on.
and
Go on, you go first.
just quickly on adding one point to Jennifer's point, absolutely right. These are resources that are related to subsidies, and it's not just about to eliminating the subsidies, is to actually eliminating the harmful subsidies and use money, potentially the same amounts, through redirecting those subsidies as incentives to nature positive practices. So, industrial fishing, we started to cut subsidies early in the year through the WTO process. Subsidies can be then redirected to artisanal, more sustainable fisheries. Intensive agriculture, more environmentally friendly agriculture, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a question of spending, because transitioning from a nature negative to a nature positive is complicated. And those subsidies today spent to support a nature negative economy could actually incentivize a nature positive set of practices.
And Patricia?
I will address the two questions very quickly. You think about $7 billion for nature being very expensive, and we don't realize that we're putting over $1 trillion on subsidies that are destroying nature. Okay, we're putting the money in the wrong places. And yes, we need the money for nature because we need to restore a lot of what we have damaged. And that is expensive. Now, in terms of the proposal of the GEF, there are 3 proposals that the GEF has made that will enable a faster, more accessible, and more diverse way of funding. That is being discussed and shared with the countries and with the governments. We want to make sure that we address the issues that the GEF has had in terms of their governance and how not so flexible funding it is. We want to make sure that we already use the structures that are already there, so then we can move into implementation as quickly as possible, channeling more funding, more diverse funding, more accessible to all people and to local communities and indigenous peoples.
And there was a report from Business for Nature and the B team earlier this year about the $1.8 trillion in subsidies that need to be reformed if you want to find that. Thank you very much, everyone. Like I said, if there are any more questions, we'll be at the back for a little bit if you need to come to us. Thank you.